A federal court has now applied the Supreme Court's Rahimi decision in a new gun case. And this ruling matters because it shows how lower courts are actually using Rahimi in practice, not just what the Supreme Court said on paper. When the Supreme Court decided United States versus Rahimi, the ruling was narrow but important. The court held that individuals subject to domestic violence restraining orders could still be prohibited from possessing firearms, rejecting the argument that such restrictions were categorically unconstitutional under the Second Amendment. At the same time, the court emphasized that firearm regulations still must be grounded in historical tradition and tied to a legitimate governmental justification. Since that decision, the key question has not been whether Rahimi allows gun restrictions in every case, but how lower courts would interpret and apply it going forward. This new federal ruling provides one of the clearest answers yet. In this case, a federal court was asked to decide whether a firearm restriction could stand under Rahimi's framework. Rather than treating Rahimi as a blank check for gun bans, the court engaged directly with the Supreme Court's reasoning. It examined whether the restriction at issue fit within the historical tradition of firearm regulation, and whether it targeted individuals who posed a demonstrated danger. The court did not simply cite Rahimi and move on. Instead, it analyzed the scope of the ruling, emphasizing that Rahimi does not authorize broad, generalized firearm prohibitions. The decision made clear that Rahimi applies in limited circumstances where the government can show a close historical analog and a clear connection between the restriction and public safety concerns tied to specific conduct. This is important because one of the major concerns following Rahimi was that courts might use it to justify sweeping gun restrictions without doing the historical analysis required by Bruen. That did not happen here. Instead, the court treated Rahimi as a clarification, not a reversal. The judge acknowledged that the Second Amendment protects an individual right to keep and bear arms, and that restrictions remain subject to constitutional limits. The ruling emphasized that Rahimi does not eliminate the need for courts to scrutinize firearm laws carefully. What makes this decision notable is that it shows Rahimi being applied in a restrained way. The court did not expand the ruling beyond its facts. It did not treat Rahimi as permission to uphold every gun restriction that involves public safety concerns, and it did not abandon the historical test that the Supreme Court established in Bruen. From a legal perspective, this decision reinforces that Rahimi operates within the Bruen framework rather than replacing it. The Supreme Court did not return to interest balancing or policy-driven analysis. Instead, Rahimi clarified that certain firearm restrictions aimed at individuals who pose a concrete danger may be consistent with historical tradition. For gun owners and Second Amendment advocates, this distinction matters. It means that Rahimi does not automatically weaken Bruen or open the door to broad firearm bans. Lower courts are still required to examine history, context, and the scope of the regulation at issue. For states and prosecutors, the ruling sends a different message. Rahimi can be used to defend some firearm restrictions, but only when the government can meet its burden. Courts are not accepting generalized arguments about safety or modern policy goals. They are demanding evidence of historical support and a close fit between the regulation and the conduct being addressed. This federal ruling also highlights the evolving nature of Second Amendment litigation. Courts are now actively sorting through how Bruen and Rahimi interact, and early decisions like this one will shape how future cases are decided. Importantly, the court's analysis suggests that Rahimi will not be a one-size-fits-all solution for governments defending gun laws. Each restriction will still rise or fall on its own merits. Laws that are narrowly tailored and historically grounded may survive. Broad or categorical bans are likely to face continued skepticism. Another key takeaway from this decision is that courts are paying close attention to how firearm prohibitions are framed. The ruling emphasized that restrictions tied to judicial findings, individualized assessments, and defined legal processes are more defensible than blanket prohibitions applied without distinction. That distinction could become critical as challenges continue against age-based restrictions, public carry laws, and other firearm regulations. Courts may increasingly look at whether a law targets specific dangerous conduct or simply regulates firearm possession as a matter of policy. This case also demonstrates that Rahimi has not ended Second Amendment litigation. If anything, it has refined it. Courts now have additional guidance on how to evaluate firearm restrictions, but the fundamental requirement remains the same. The government must justify modern regulations by pointing to historical tradition. Looking ahead, this ruling is likely to be cited by both sides in future cases. Governments will argue that Rahimi supports targeted firearm prohibitions. Gun rights advocates will point to decisions like this one as proof that Rahimi does not erase Bruen's protections. As more courts weigh in, patterns will begin to emerge. Some restrictions may consistently survive challenge, while others continue to fail. This process will take time, and it will likely require further clarification from appellate courts and, eventually, the Supreme Court. For now, what matters is that this federal court did not treat Rahimi as a green light for sweeping gun control. Instead, it applied the decision carefully within constitutional limits and with continued respect for the Second Amendment. That approach signals that the post-Bruen, post-Rahimi legal landscape will be more disciplined than some expected. Courts are not abandoning constitutional analysis, they are refining it. As additional rulings come down, we'll get a clearer picture of how Rahimi reshapes firearm law across the country. For now, this case stands as an early example of how lower courts are navigating the balance between public safety concerns and constitutional rights under the Supreme Court's current Second Amendment framework.